Welcome everybody. Today we're gonna have our seventh artist spotlight with Gabriel and Francisco in Portugal. Francisco, you're in Lisbon, and
yeah,
Gabriel, I understand you're in another city right now. Where are you now?
I'm in Sintra, which is just it's very close to Lisbon. Actually, it's just 25 kilometers away from Lisbon. But I came away for the weekend, so I'm surrounded by trees and bird sounds.
Got it. So originally we received an application from Gabriel, and when we were doing the first interview, you actually sort of revealed, like, actually this project I would like to do it together with Francisco. So I know Gabriel, Gabriel, you're originally from Brazil, right? And but you live in Portugal now. And you work more you do installations, the topic of nature and the interaction with animals is something that's at the core of your work. And then Francisco, you're a sculptor, right? You work with ceramics and sculpture.
Yeah, I'm working with the ceramics and sculpture and video too, because
video as well.
Yeah, in video as well. And also the theme of the animal, it's been around my practice and my research during the past 3 years because of the thesis of my master. And so me and Gabriel, that we had this project about the bats of the library that we want to do together, and we think that this could be the perfect opportunity to do it.
Yes. So before we go into that, can we talk about what was your experience with art very early on in your lives, growing up in Brazil, growing up in Portugal? What was, did you grow up in a family that encouraged art, or how did you discover that this was your thing? Let's start with you, Gabriel.
Well, to me, it was I didn't really grow up in a family that was very much attuned with art, but somehow I think my parents have always been somehow kind of performative or comical, and a bit of jokesters, you know. So I always had in my life, I think, this possibility of adding like a different layer to reality somehow, you know, like a kind of more magical, comical possibility in like the actuality of the world, you know. Like I remember camping in my room, like we'd set up like the entire tent and turn on the air conditioning and have those experiences. They gave me a camera once, and I think it's the first time that I started making stuff that could be nowadays kind of recognized as some sort of like art making, you know. But I remember I would construct these dioramas and get like a fan and then blow like, you know, like leaves and things into this little diorama set that I would build, like trying to create like this kind of windy like this windy scene, you know, and then having like little toy, like small toy people and toy trees, like from this kind of like architecture shop, and creating these dioramas and kind of either like showering them or blowing some wind on them. So creating these kind of other possibilities around like the actuality of life. I think this is how it started, and it really encouraged that, but it wasn't really recognized as some sort of art, or I didn't really do any sort of art courses before I actually did my BA.
Mm-hmm. And in your case, Francisco, what was your experience?
My experience, I don't have like an artist in my family, but I have people connected to art through design, through music. And I've always been super creative when I was a child, but I didn't have that in my family because I was supposed to go to science, to medicine, or to biology. That was what I really wanted to do. And then before the high school, and because in Portugal you have to choose the area in your high school, like you have to choose arts, science, letters, or economy before the BA. And so I had this changing professor, which her name is Ana do Canto, and she was from this art school, Antonio Arroyo in Lisbon. So she gave us really good art education in that I was really young, I was 14. And that made me change from this path to science. And then I went to art, and then I had the course of ceramics.
That's a big change. Yeah.
That's a big change, yeah. And I had that course of ceramic, and then I went to the sculpture BA. Now I'm finishing the master in media art.
So in your case, Gabriel, your bachelor's, was that in London, or
Yeah.
how did you end up moving to London?
Actually, because of so I did my bachelor at Chelsea School of Art in London, and there was a time where they were actually like recruiting in South America. Sometimes they have this thing where like they send a representative to kind of do interviews remotely somehow, you know. So, and I heard that they were doing that in Brazil because I had a really good friend that was applying also to the University of the Arts. So I actually got interviewed for Chelsea in Rio, which is kind of surreal, but then it worked, and then I moved to London, and that was the kind of first time that I was really away from home for a long time. That was 5 years, and kind of like, yeah, kind of constitutes the bulk of my education, because it was really, yeah, the first time that I actually studied art, and it was a fine art practice course, you know, so it wasn't really focused on any sort of specific medium, but yeah, like, I mean, it really sort of formed me, and it formed my dialogues, and like everything that I kind of, yeah, I'd say like how I operate, like everything really started there, you know. And then in the master here, it's just more of a chance to like, yeah, get deeper into sculpture, because it's a sculpture master, you know, and having like all the workshops and the possibility. But I think conceptually, the entry point was really the course at Chelsea, also because it was not divided by media, you know, like it was very much, everybody was together. We had people who were doing performance and sound and painting and sculpture, and everything was really kind of together. And yeah, it's super interesting to start off with that.
So it was in the Lisbon Academy of Fine Arts where your paths cross, right? And as we mentioned earlier, it was both of you have these, well, you deal with topics related to nature and interaction with animals, and that's like at the core of your work, right?
Yeah, I mean,
were you classmates? Were you doing projects together then? And that was what, 4 years ago?
Yeah, it was 3 years ago. We are not classmates, because Gabriel is in the sculpture master and I'm in the multimedia art, but we were in the same place, and so we started to connect there, of course, in our practices. But this is our first work, like together, that we are doing everything together. But it started there. Yeah.
And what is it about their relationship with humans and animals that calls your attention? What is it that you want to show the world through art in this relationship?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, but there are many aspects, because when you get through this animal-human world that is so big, you know, there is so many aspects, and I have to get into that, into my research, and there are like philosophical questions, like how do we see animals, like as beings, or as objects, and all the characteristics that animals have, and that can talk about the human nature. And
yeah, I think what's like the most interesting kind of overlapping, and this is why it makes so much sense that this is our first project together. It's like because, you know, I mean, obviously, as we said, we had already been like brewing these ideas for a while and thinking about doing this project, and the fact that it's somehow in the context of co-residency, we had to kind of contextualize it in the current moment, you know, in the COVID situation. And then we were like, we already had this very sort of kind of fully formed idea of doing the project with the bats, but we were like, oh wait, you know, so like the bats have been somewhat central, especially in the beginning of this kind of eruption, you know, and the situation in the world. So like maybe we can connect it to that. And I think this is what's super interesting, because somehow you know, like Chico is really interested in this kind of so like the human codification of animals somehow, and at the same time, like I'm also interested in kind of cryptozoology and kind of mythological creatures, and also like ways of processing nature, of accessing nature from a human perspective, you know. And I mean, this kind of meets perfectly, because somehow there's this sort of the bad side, if you may, like, which really and this kind of, yeah, like codification of the bats as some sort of villain or like a kind of bloodsucker, you know, which I think somehow would connect more to like Chico's way of operating and looking at things and trying to track these representations in culture of like representations of animals in culture, you know. Whilst I'm somehow interested in cryptozoology and like an aspect of like the penumbra, you know, or like something that's like in the shadows and refusing to reveal itself, because it's something that became very obvious and somewhat central to the work, and like as we're filming it, is how kind of elusive they are, you know. When we came into this project thinking that, oh, we're gonna get bats on camera, we're gonna shoot them from here and get a shot from there, and actually the fact that there's this refusal to appear, it says a lot about yeah, like how we interact with nature, you know, but it also says a lot about yeah, what the bat is willing to show, you know. So it has this kind of cave aspect, you know. I think this is more where I would be like, that's what the part that would connect more to my previous work, but then the fact that we're kind of doing it together, you know, and bringing our previous kind of baggages, it's super interesting.
Sure. I mean, if somebody's just tuning in and is watching this video and they hear us talking about bats, just want to clarify that it's at the core and of the project that you're doing with co-residency. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But those topics that you're mentioning, is that something that you've been exploring with other pieces of art that you've made?
Yeah.
Like, for example, I'm thinking of the endless drip.
Oh yeah.
So what was the context? Like, how did you come with the endless drip?
So like, I mean, there's it's funny you mentioned that work, because somehow, so like this was already like a period that I was kind of interested in how certain sort of landscapes or natural environments can somehow be like a fertile ground for the appearance of kind of proto-narratives and like kind of mythological stories, you know, like when you have the impenetrable forest, or when you have a kind of deep body of water, like a lake or something, you know, and there's this kind of murk to the water. So how this kind of, yeah, like this kind of cloudy, murky penumbra aspect of certain natural environments, how that can be somehow like what begets somehow like another kind of narrative, or a more fantastical narrative, or a more mythological approach to reality, and how these things are kind of warped, you know. And that thing was
the
just
textures are just the textures. It's what you look at it and then you realize what it is, right? It's just a tree cortex and the dripping. What do you call that? The savia? Is that what you call it? I don't know.
Sap. I think tree sap.
Yeah, I guess so.
No, but it was actually golden syrup. What I used.
Oh, that's what it was. So how long do you have to record it for? Like, is it something the syrup? It's something that drips for a long time. Like, you have to record for hours and hours, or?
Yeah, it was just a one single pour, and then the fact that the drip is so viscous and slow and lethargic, it meant that I could just observe the way that it kind of made its way down from the top of that rock and tree trunks all the way to the bottom, you know. So I dripped it once, and then I just kind of was accompanying, because there was somehow like a sort of liquid performance there, like this kind of like enchantment of viscosity that drags really slowly and form peaks and continues to drip, you know. So it was kind of, I was just kind of going after those interesting moments that I could film, but it was just one single drip, if you may, and then I was just observing this slow drag to the bottom.
And the performance aspect of things, that's something that I found you playing with, but very early on in your career, with something that you did at IKEA, where you were basically, I think IKEA has this slogan like make yourself comfortable, and you took it upon you to make yourself comfortable. So you spent 8 hours there sleeping, taking naps, taking supper at a display kitchen counter or something like that.
Yeah. And kind of like playing with the, exactly as you said, like playing with their slogan, you know, because I think their slogan is get comfortable. So I'm like, well, I will. And I just did. But I mean, I think it also speaks to this kind of like attempt to add some sort of layer to reality, you know, and kind of peek behind the curtain, see what can be done, see what's in between, you know. Is there something else here that can be done? Is that like what kind of code is in operation here, you know, or can we attempt to slightly change that code or warp it, and you know, kind of see reality and things in a different way? So I think that,
and what was
like
people's reaction, you know? Sorry, what was people's reaction to it? Like, because what I find interesting about this type of performances is that enough experienced performances like on the city downtown, where you come as a performer and then you realize that in reality there's other performers there, and they react to the fact that, oh, there's someone new in town, and they're very territorial. But in this case, you were inside a place, and there's like, oh, it's almost like everybody knows the script that they need to follow, right? But you're disrupting that script.
Yeah. And it was quite funny because actually when I was doing the kind of sleeping part, so I entered in one of the rooms and I literally tucked myself into the bed. And it was so funny because there was this moment where this guy walked in and he was like, oh, I'm sorry. Kind of like as if he kind of interrupted the very sort of personal moment. So I mean, it's just easy. It just kind of proves how kind of thin these conceptions are, you know, of like what like domesticity and public space, you know, and into such a kind of crazy interplay of it in the showrooms at IKEA, you know. But it was obviously very easy to create a sense of privacy because just by sort of appropriating the bed itself, like I already kind of made the room my own, to the point that the guy was completely uncomfortable and he felt like he walked into me or something, you know. So that was an interesting reaction.
So at this point, both of you finished your masters, right?
Yeah, almost.
Almost? So you're still in the process of...
I'm just waiting because of COVID. I'm just waiting for the defense.
Oh, so you're done with the... And you mentioned your thesis was also about the topic of animals. Is it? Yeah. What's the title of your thesis?
It's the living screen. That is the name of the project, and then it's who's watching. I have to translate to English. Exhibitions of live animal in public context. So I'm speaking about works of art that use animals as a contemporary practice that started with Joseph Beuys, with America Likes Me, and I like America Likes Me. And I contextualize this practice in the zoo culture, and I go a bit back in the history of the zoo. So I speak about menageries and curiosity cabinets through the concept of exotic, like, yeah, and so my practice have to be with all these aspects that I'm finding in my research, like all the works that I'm doing thinking about this theater that happens in the zoo, like who are the actors, who is watching that.
And what are the main conclusions from your research? If you could share them here.
I think this project, it's kind of not the conclusion, but it will be on the conclusion, because I'm working with animals and I'm working with bats to show human aspects. So, and we are not working with enclosure bats, we are working freely and with cameras, we are filming the bats in their environment. And but the conclusion, I think, like, it's not necessary to have the body of the animal in the show, because we have screens. And also in the zoo, thinking about the zoo of the future, and we have to think that there are many zoos in the world, and there are more tigers in America than in Asia. And so I think the screen can be a savior for this.
Gabriel, and in your case, you did finish and defended your work already, or you're still also waiting?
I'm also waiting, because we have to wait for this situation to pass, to kind of work on or think about like our defense. The last time we heard anything about it, apparently they were going to be through Zoom, but maybe, I don't know, maybe there will be a chance of like defending it physically there, but I'm not sure yet.
But sorry, I might not get this right. Is it that, are you doing the thesis together, or you have a different topic on your end?
No, I have a different topic. So
what's your
it's actually funny you mentioned the endless drip work, because actually my thesis is on viscosity. So I'm using viscosity and the kind of liminal aspect of viscosity, this kind of in-betweenness of viscosity. It's neither liquid nor solid. There's a threat to it, like there's a fear of contamination, you know, like, because who has never had this dream, you know, of like sticking your entire hand in like a jar of honey, you know, like there's this fascination to the viscous, but there is the kind of clingy aspect to it. It kind of clings onto you, and it stays, and it dissolves like this barrier, you know, between yourself and the object. Somehow you kind of become the honey, you know, it's hard to get rid of it. So I'm using viscosity to talk about the liminal state, so this idea of in-betweenness, and I'm just using viscosity to explore it, this like liminal potential in sculpture, so in physical materials, physical components, what materials have a quality of in-betweenness, and what kind of insecurities they provoke, you know, why do people feel insecure about it, like in between states and liminal states. So I'm just using viscosity to talk about all of these concerns associated with liminality.
And you have it throughout your work in the last 3 to 4 years. You see the element of liquid or viscosity, or I'm thinking of something in the water where you have, I think it's like a speaker, and then there's like, is it paint or something coming out with the movement of the speaker? So you're mixing elements of sound, cornstarch with water. So it's just a way of creating a non-Newtonian fluid, which also has like a viscosity that's very hard to measure. Like I mean, you can probably look it up online, but it's the kind of, you know, like people do like entire pools of this non-Newtonian fluid, and it's something that you can kind of walk on it if you walk really fast, because it like creates some sort of resistance on the surface. But then you can also stick your hand and it will kind of sink. It will go through this liquid. So it has an interesting, curious plasticity, you know, almost as if it's kind of alive. So there's definitely this animist aspects to my practice, also kind of trying to look at the material world and seeing the forces that, you know, that they kind of transmit and how we interpret these forces. But yeah, it's just mostly ways of accessing. I'm very interested in kind of also like sculpture and like psychology somehow, you know, and how the material world can really provoke feelings and or insecurities or you know, or many things. So in your head, like, obviously we know that the future is very uncertain and we don't know how the economy is going to open up, and if, you know, all of this rhetoric about the new normal and all of these things. But in your heart of hearts, after graduation, you guys are going back into, you know, the workforce and all of those things. What's your biggest dream? What's your ideal situation? Is it having your own studio? Is it a combination of being continuing doing your art and doing something else on the side? Like, what's the ideal situation? Is it going back to education? I don't know. What is it? Let's hear from Francisco first.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to during
yeah
this
I'm
time.
sorry.
Yeah, but yeah, I feel this last year that I'm working just in my practice in these 2 years, because the master in art is like our practice. It's not about an exercise of like, it's not about like the BA that I had in sculpture, that we are responding to exercises. And so now, and we already have our studio. I think we're going to, I want to still have the studio, and I want to work in other things because I need to. I don't know how it's going to be, but I don't see the things like the end of the master and the beginning of something, because I think that I already began something. I think it's just be a continuation. But I want to work with these things, with this aspect of the animal, and in many ways, because there are amazing projects like of reintroduction of species, and I don't know. I'm working. I'm doing a project with kids. So we end with ceramics. So I will start that project and have to do with animals, and we're going to have like these talks with kids about extinct animals or animals that will be extinct, and the work will keep going.
Yeah, I think there's a myth about that idea of separating both. Like, oh, am I just going to do this kind of work? Am I going to combine it? Or I personally have a very good friend who's a sculptor, and he has sculptures in 2 different cities in China. He has sculptures that one of them was purchased by Elton John's art curator, and it's in Washington, D.C. and in other places of the world. But he has combined that he has had to support himself economically from other sides as well. So I admire the fact that he has been able to balance the both in a very interesting way, and still be a prolific artist. How about you, Gab?
I think, yeah, like also, you know, this kind of idea that half of the projects kind of pay the bills and half of the projects fill your hearts. I think definitely this this project that we're working now, it's much more on the kind of affectionate and like, yeah, like it really touches us, and we're so happy to be doing it. And also I think like we have also been discussing this, you know, because it's obviously like an artistic project, but like our methodology in terms of how we kind of encountered all of these ideas and people and even the bats themselves and the locations, it was almost like a kind of scientific approach, but from a kind of naive perspective, you know, because we're not scientists and we're not wanting to be scientists, but this kind of distance, you know, that we have kind of allows us to explore these things with more freedom. But we've been thinking about ways of kind of carrying this project forward, you know, because even it becomes more and more evident like how the kind of, you know, how bats are somehow indispensable, and how they can be used in sort of agriculture, so as like a substitute to pesticides, you know. So like there's many ways of collaborating with bats in a different, in a different sort of way that I think can be somehow really prolific. You know, we're thinking about whether, you know, we can even, like work with these places that are doing, or like introducing bats as somehow pest controllers, and just kind of not have this be like a kind of finite project, but maybe like trying to find ways of carrying these concerns like further into the future, you know. I mean, like,
Yeah.
'cause they're incredible creatures, like somehow like bees, you know, like they also pollinate, like they're pollinizers, you know, like they carry out they carry out sort of pollen, and they're really efficient at eating insects, you know. So like, I mean, any sort of plantation that has issues with that could potentially consider introducing bats, and then maybe it will be much more aggressive on the plants themselves, you know, just having a substitute to pesticides. That's a kind of, yeah, I mean, it's just interesting to think about these ways of collaborating with them, you know, not in a kind of not as an imposition somehow, or like using them, you know, but like finding ways of, because, you know, like in these situations they just have bat shelters there, like smaller bat shelters, you know, so if you make the room, they will come. So it's kind of like in this kind of way of thinking, you know, and how should we make room, or where can we make room for these, not only these creatures but many others, you know?
Yeah, so again, diving into that bat world, the story of your project, like you said, even though you're not scientists, but just the story of the project calls anybody's attention. And that's not to minimize any of the work that's being done by all the other artists. That's also very interesting and valuable. But there's a particularity about the story of the work that you're doing that resonates with virtually anybody that hears about it. So it's if anybody's missing out on the conversation about bats, it's Gabriel and Francisco are working on a project in one of the main libraries in Lisbon. It's a classic building that was built by royalty, I think.
Yeah.
And that has bats living within the library that basically eat the worms and the bookworms, and they're part of the ecosystem. So at the core of their idea, they are changing that misconception of the bats within the COVID-19 situation, where they are seen as the evil makers, right? The threat to the world, when in reality, it's humans, you know, getting rid of their ecosystems and things like that that put us in a vulnerable situation, right? And so you're combining the library with this other region is it also in Lisbon, where the bats used to live in a building? It was you know, real estate development, and there was a movement to preserve them, right? What's the general concept of the bat in Portugal? Because I don't know. For example, in places where I've lived, like China, a bat is a figure of prosperity within the, I believe, Buddhist philosophy, and it's regarded as that. It has a positive connotation, right?
Yeah.
But is the figure of a bat in Portugal something that's normal? Like at night, you're like, oh, the bats are here or flying. Or I think in places like in Sydney, there were times where, you know, the bats would come and fly in, and they try to get rid of them because, well, I don't know. That's a whole nother story. But yeah. What is the figure of the bat in the Portuguese context?
So Portugal, it's a very Christian Catholic country. Mm-hmm. So bats are not just because of that, but bats are kind of violent in a Dantean way, because all of the image in pictures like really old, and in the West culture, bats have this bad. Bats are violent in the West culture.
The vampire.
The vampire, and before vampire, Dante, and all the images of hell, and all these figures with the bats wings. They are sort of a strange thing, and bats are night habitants. And so everything that is from this idea of shadow, this idea of dark, this idea of cave. So I think conceptually, they are valid here in Portugal. And there are not that many bats as in Sydney, I think. There are bats, but there are really little bats. And in the city, you cannot see them that much. You see more in the countryside. And we are really interesting in this idea of why they are villains, why they are bad, because animals are not villains. And thinking about hyenas and snakes, how snakes are villains too, but also snakes are the symbol of cure and the medicine. So even this symbolic way of thinking that just speaks about the human condition and not about the animal itself.
Yeah, and there's certainly an element of one of the things or the topics that has been very relevant to me during this global crisis is the concept of empathy. And when you talk about things like the bats or the snakes and all these things, I've mentioned I've lived in China for 10 years, and that was a very unique experience to put myself in a context where all of my Western upbringing and cultural context had no reference, right? Like I had to tap into a whole new experience of society and interacting with other people and concepts of, what it is. What it could be about food, it could be about personal relations and things like that. And it did make me see how we have all these preconceptions. Could be about society or the topics of racism that we've been talking about within the recent discussion topics in our co-residency, or it could be in this case about animals. But in the end, it's I think, Gabriel, you were talking about unveiling certain realities and realizing that, even though you've been thinking this way all your life, there's another point of view, and that's a very powerful message, right? It's a very powerful message within the context of the bats themselves, and if we want to approach it from the environmental point of view. But if we want to be more philosophical about it, it's also stronger, right? Last time we were talking about how you guys are using the concept of the cave, Plato's cave, but more from a positive point of view. Can we talk about that a little bit again?
Yeah. So I think that we think that Plato's cave, in the context of the bats as habitants of the cave. So we think that Plato sort of condemned the caves to be cavernous, to be caves, in a bad way, and he split the world in two, in the world of the souls, world of the objects, and the physical world. And so in that starting point, animals, not just the bats, but animals are put in the physical world because they would not have soul. So that's a point, and then Descartes will do that again, will split the world again from these Platos. But the cave it means home, because art started in caves. Not art, because art is a recent concept, but what we call art today is expression. So it started in caves, and also caves were home. And also in the Vietnam War in Laos, the neighbor country, there were people, thousands of people that were hidden from the American bombs during 9 years in caves. So caves were their savior. And how caves are so bad, how we think in caves in this sub-world so badly. And if we think about plateaus, we will try to find this way to this cave, to our origin, and how our origin was put aside to be in the shadows, and the enlightenment will be in the other side, out of the cave. I don't know if I...
So, yeah, absolutely. So is there anything else you can reveal about your work that you're doing now? Because I think there's things that you have mapped out or are concepting. And then you want to do a little bit of sculpture, you're doing a little bit of film. How has the idea or the whole concepting phase evolved? And we're now halfway through, right? So where are we standing now? Are you going in a new direction? Did you discover something new that you didn't know before? Well, okay, let's start with that, and I'll have more questions later.
I think first of all, it's so nice that you mentioned like the topic of empathy, because I think ultimately like what we're trying to do here, we don't really know if we're going to be successful at changing anyone's minds about the bats, you know, while doing this. But what we really attempt to do is to reveal or to make evident how these things or how these perceptions are culturally coded, you know, like the perception of the bat or the perception of the cave. So the outcome wouldn't be like a kind of like a transformation or convincing someone, but rather to make the ways in which these aspects of life and of nature are culturally coded and somehow end up like performing these kind of crucial and very important and defining roles in society, you know. And it's kind of, it involves extremely sort of big questions, and I think just kind of rendering that visible, it's something that can be useful, you know. And just making, I think COVID is doing a lot of that kind of, I think it's a kind of huge whistleblower somehow. I think it's been revealing so much just by the kind of havoc that it creates, you know. It reveals all sort of things that seemed that they were really sort of set in stone, but they were actually just kind of tiptoeing around, you know. Like it's just things that looked very defined and kind of rigid, but they're actually quite sort of precarious and malleable, you know. And I think like COVID is kind of like revealing, so just the ways that we kind of look at reality, you know, and things around it, and what we take for granted and what we accept as a defining reality, or a kind of like a world, a unified worldview, you know. Like I think it's just a way of asking all of those questions. And yeah, I
think the first layer that's unveiled, it's scary. People get depressed because of isolation, or people get anxiety because of this, or we've been talking about how these ugly parts of society are also being unveiled, whether it's the topic of racism or whatever it is, right? What has been unveiled for Gabriel personally, and for Francisco personally? What has been unveiled? What have you learned personally from this time of isolation?
Do you want to start, Chico?
Yeah, I can start. I think like some habits that we had, even regarding to food habits, so I think that was like kind of a change, because after all, in all these bad thing, it's about eating bats and being in contact with these species in the way that we should not be. So I think that's really personal. I'm speaking about like my experience, but also that this is like our system, it's so fragile, you know. This was just unveiled like, and even in Portugal, like it's really great for tourists, and it's really great for people that have money, but for Portuguese people, it's like Portugal is not good for Portugal people. There's a lot of poverty here, and a lot of the things are being unveiled, a lot of preconceptions also, and yeah, it has been a hard time. I'm very how I say, I'm very sorry, I'm missing the word. Privilegiado.
Privileged.
Yeah. Privileged. I'm very privileged, and I know that because I could be in my home during this, but it concerned me that a lot of people could not, and I had my studio like 2 minutes away from my home, so it was the time to doing work, and I was putting myself to work, and that was the kind of a savior for me, but I know it's a big privilege.
Yeah. What about you, Gabriel? What's been unveiled or revealed for you personally? What have you learned, or where do you feel learning from this?
Oh yeah, like I mean, I would probably start off with so like in a very sort of personal, like not yet thinking about the kind of larger scale of things, but this obviously kind of connects to the larger scale of things also. But it's the like food habits and kind of putting my money where my mouth is, you know, like kind of really updating like like trying to get like my actual habits and practices, like the way we shop, like what we choose, because you know it seems so very abstract, but at the same time you're partaking in very specific systems, you know, and you have to at least be aware of like of the ways in which you're participating in that system and what that system entails, you know. So I think this kind of structural revelation that COVID brought, you know, the sheer like impotence of governments and like and the unpreparedness of governments to something of this scale, I think was very evident to me. And also, yeah, just trying to like, it was a moment also just the whole, you know, the whole sort of quarantine aspect and kind of really kind of delving into myself and asking if my actions were kind of matching my ethics and my morals. And I think it was a chance to do so. I'm not saying that I have succeeded completely, or that it will be this way for, you know, for God knows how long, but like we're trying to do this exercise of really kind of understanding if my eating habits, if my spending habits, or if everything is in tune with how I want to exist in the world, you know, and where I choose to spend my money actually. And
what's been the main change? What's been the main change in terms of eating food, or like both of you mentioned food habits? Like, what's the main difference?
Well, I
just
stopped
find
eating
myself
meat, vegetarian since the beginning.
Both of you are vegetarian? Oh, since the beginning of the quarantine?
Yeah.
Since the beginning, I'm eating fish once in a while, but mostly vegetarian, and I don't eat meat since the quarantine, since the beginning.
And how did you did you think about being vegetarian for a while, or?
Yeah, sure. Like even like politically speaking, because I like to eat meat. Like, I will not hide that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a political aspect too, you know. And you have to choose where we put our money, and all of this like COVID. It made us think again about this meat industry and about the way that we approach animals also.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling good, really good.
You're feeling good? I tried being vegetarian when I was 15 years old, and then one New Year's celebration, I just ate meat again.
Yeah.
But I have to admit that I felt healthier when I was vegetarian. Like, I didn't feel stuffed after eating, and I felt like I was just eating what I needed to eat. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting change, because I understand that there's like just eating one plant-based meal a day has an impact to even global warming, right? Because of many things that are attached to buying meat, etc.
Yeah, it's very unsustainable.
Yeah. I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something to think about. do you think this is related for, you know, your love to animals that you also bring into your art?
Kind of.
Probably.
Kind of. It just made me think, because all these artworks in this research made me question a place that I loved when I was a child, that is the zoo.
Yeah.
Sensation that I would love to do, like to see a tiger, to see an elephant, to see it. And that made me, it comes from this conflict, from this self-conflict. And now, like the works that I'm doing, I'm thinking like, I want to talk about animals and people also, but I don't want to use, I'm sure that I don't want to use animals. So I'm using trap cams to trap pigeons in the frame, in the screen, and other animals. And also this, of course, what we are eating have to deal with that, because when we start researching and when we go in a way, I think we have to go in that way. We have to think about it. And also, like, all of these COVID and all of these flus that come from pigs and birds and everything. And I think it's the future. It is the future. Also that it's difficult, because when I was a child, I was eating meat every day because of my parents. In Portugal, people used to have a lot of meat with rice and fried potato, right? And so we are very used to this culturally, which is new, because 50 years ago, 70 years ago, people would not eat meat that frequently, because people were much poor and it was not accessible in this way that we have. It's so accessible today.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. I'll check on you in a while to see if you're still vegetarian.
Maybe every week.
Before we walk into the quick fire questions, we had a discussion with Javelin Richards today, and she was talking about the muse, and she was talking about this connection that as an artist you have with something that drives you to do art. And she was trying to tap into the artist and sort of navigate what makes you stay connected with it, because some of you go on and take the risk of, you know, following that to the full extent of becoming an artist and making a living out of it. And some people just sort of lost it along the way. When was the first time that you felt a connection with this thing that drives you to make art? And how do you stay connected with it? Gab. Oh, wait, I can hear you. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, art, I think art, yeah, to me, it's always been a way very much connected to like this possibility of making the invisible visible somehow. So like, I'm very interested in this kind of like the task of the translator somehow, you know, that each artist has, and the diligence that it kind of needs, you know, for you to really be committed to that thing that's in your head and not sabotaging yourself, and really getting it out in the best way possible, you know, in the most realistic way possible, but also in the most efficient way. But to me, it's very much about this task of translating and of trying to get things out from the head and making them, and making, because in this process you also understand what they are, you know, in this kind of externalization. You are finally able to see it, but it takes I think diligence, and I think it's something that's constantly morphing also, and I think it should be. I think it, like in terms of like what art means to oneself, you know, I think it means something different for each person, and it's just another tool. That's the way I see it. It's a tool, but it's very sort of But yeah, I think it's a tool. It's a tool that has sort of many ways of manifesting itself, and I think that's why it's somehow so interesting.
So you stay connected with it by creating? Don't worry, she can walk by. So you stay connected with it, because you know, we were talking, for example, Yeji does a lot of writing, and that's something that really helps her to stay connected with it. Or for Fumban, there's a drive that he gets in using his ability as a playwright and writer to help his community. And in your case, I'm not sure if I'm hearing you correctly, but is the way you stay connected with it, the way you nurture that relationship with your creative power or your muse, is by doing more work, you get an idea and you honor it and you execute it. You stay connected with it until you have an outcome.
Yeah, actually, I think you kind of nail it if you put it that way, I would say. But I mean, it takes, yeah, as I said, diligence, you know, and it's just, it's a tool. I also don't sort of overly romanticize the art making. I mean, it has this incredible power, but at the end of the day, it's just another tool that's available, you know, and and I mean, it really kind of, it's what you kind of do with it, you know, and how and how you do it. But yeah, it's like a kind of completely malleable institution and idea in my head, you know, and it can take any form and kind of serve you, or serve each person, serve oneself in the way that person wants it's, you know, wants to use it. And it can kind of morph, and that's what's so beautiful about it, you know, that it's this kind of, yeah, it's an arena somehow, you know, it's a place to bring things, and like the lack of walling within art. I think it's so important, you know, you can be working with questions concerning biology or aesthetics or the material world or ethereal questions, or like any sort of, and it's just that one territory where you can pool all of these things and work with them together, you know, without any sort of issues. Because other subjects are very much sort of like well and meticulously divided, and you can't really pool these other subjects and question. And I think intersectionality, I think it's so important nowadays, and art is really one of those territories that allow for intersectionality, you know, and kind of like thinking about things always in relation to something, you know. Yeah, because everything's kind of connected somehow.
I believe that.
Yeah.
In your case, Francisco, what is it how do you stay connected with your creative power, your muse, or whatever you want to call it?
I also agree with Gabriel. It is a tool. I also don't romanticize like the art practice. I think my inspiration is my work. And also, it started with a need to do. You know, I have this need to create, even create with hands, so this sculpture.
Yeah.
And that helped me a lot. That is my psychiatry, psychology. You know, so that helps myself. So it started with that need, but then it went to the way that I think, and it's shaping the way that I think. I'm changing the way that I think, not just because of artwork and my practice, but because of other things, but because of artworks, you know, and artworks of other artists that can show you things that even your education didn't show you, or your country don't show you, like in the school, like all these themes. Like Portugal, teachers don't teach students of how Portugal was colonial, really, really, really bad. And they teach you like Portugal discovered the world in Brazil, and they use this term, discoveries, which is really, really bad. So Portugal have that that thing that it's a big question. And it was through art, through artistic work of Grada Quilomba and a lot of Brazilian artists, that I was starting to think about this, because I was living in Lisbon since I'm a kid, in a bubble, you know, because Lisbon is the bubble of regarding what is Portugal and what is the other cities that surrounded Lisbon. So art have that important role, and even you think about zoos and about how how we can use animals in museums or exhibitions, like if it's correct or if it's not. Before I started this work, I would love to go to a zoo, not like I think in 6 years ago. I was not thinking about it, so it's a tool of thinking too, and it's a practical need.
Yeah. And in your case, it was strong enough to keep you away from pursuing a different career. You went for the artwork.
Yeah, I went, and I'm investing in this, and
Yeah.
I need to, yeah, how it's difficult. It gives me a bit of anxiety sometimes.
Yeah, but to be honest, that anxiety exists in any path that you might choose.
Yeah,
To be honest,
sure.
might as well do it with something fun.
Yeah, and even in Portugal, that we don't have like this support to culture, and this is cultural for many times.
Yeah.
There are not support to culture or education. Unfortunately, people have to survive, and the artistic world in Portugal, it's super small. You know, of course now we have the world, and that's a benefit.
I think it's controversial because the importance of art in the political world, in society, it's really high, but still it's on the last list of priorities in a government, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mentioned to you guys that I'd like to finish this with some quick fire questions. Recently we lost James Lipton, who was an incredible artist in the world of theater and drama and TV and movies. And he used to conduct the interviews for the Actors Studio. And at the end, he always asked these questions that were based on, it was pretty much the Proust questionnaire. So we did our own twist to that, and we had our own questions. So I'll ask the questions, and Gabriel, you go first, and then Francisco, you answer after that. So let's see. Gabriel, who's your favorite artist? And you're on mute.
Matthew Barney.
Francisco?
I'd have to say Nina Simone.
Nina Simone. Gabriel, who are your favorite heroes or heroines, fiction or non-fiction?
My mom.
Mm-hmm. And Francisco?
That's difficult. I don't have many heroes, but I can say Nina Simone also.
Nice. Gabriel, what's your favorite word and your least favorite word?
It's a Portuguese word, fronha. It's the word for pillowcase. That's my favorite word. Fronha. That's how it sounds. Yeah, maybe anger. A word I hate.
Francisco?
Avoid. Yeah.
Favorite word, I can say begonia, because it's a plant.
Begonia.
Yeah, I love the word. And fear.
Gabriel, what turns you on and what turns you off?
Yeah, fear probably turns me off. That's a good sort of words to avoid also. I think I like how Chico put it. And yeah, like sticking to something turns me on.
Francisco?
I think to be useful for me and to others too turns me on, and bad energy turns me off.
Yeah. Gabriel, what sound or noise do you love, and what sound or noise do you hate?
Well, there's a donkey where I am, and he like his chanting sounds like a ship horn. So I've been listening to that all week. It's probably my favorite sound of the moment. And sound that I don't like, maybe like car sounds. I don't know.
Francisco?
I love the sound of a fan when I'm sleeping. And I think annoying people.
Yeah. Gabriel, what's your favorite place in the world?
Iceland, maybe, or a specific beach close in Rio called Lopez Mendes.
Francisco?
To be geographic, I would say Moreré. There is an island in Brazil.
And Gabriel, what inspires you to continue doing your work?
Again, yeah, sticking to it. You know, sticking to something, committing and translating.
Chico, and in your case?
It's all the time that I have put into this journey, and also like my practice, my work, my hands, and inspiring people and animals.
Gabriel, what's your idea of happiness, and what's your idea of misery?
Like being with friends, talking, I think, I give happiness. And misery would be the opposite. Loneliness, I think. Having no one to talk to.
So this pandemic is not good for you.
Yeah.
What about you, Chico? What's your idea of happiness, and what's your idea of misery?
I think to be able to have happy moments, to have that freedom.
And the idea of misery?
And the misery to don't have a home, to have fear, don't have equal rights. This is in a social way, but also spiritual misery that is not connected to don't have a home and normally opposite.
Yeah. Gabriel, what does this global crisis mean to you?
It's like this kind of whistleblowing aspect of it. I think it's really important. It's like this unveiling aspect. That's what I want to be like most kind of like listening to and paying attention to and focusing on whatever it reveals.
Chico, and for you, what does this global crisis mean to you?
Yeah, also it means big changes.
Yeah. All right, just to finish up, Gabriel, finish these sentences for me in a very romantic or unromantic way. Art is?
A tool.
Art allows me to?
Make visible.
Without art?
There'd be something missing.
Chico, art is?
Art is a free concept with the size of the world.
Art allows me to?
Art allows me to think in the right way.
Without art?
I would probably be a scientist or a biologist.
We've been missing a very good artist. Thank you guys very much. Keep exploring, keep discovering, even if it's fear or anger, there's something beautiful that can come out of it. So it's your job to make it.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what your final product art is going to be like. Keep creating.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Erick.
We'll talk to you soon.
See you soon.
See you soon.